It's always a blessing to be able to stand before you and present God's Word. The lesson today is one that I am fully aware is going to set people in two different camps. There's going to be the introverts, and there will be the extroverts. But hopefully today we will understand the lifestyle of Jesus and how he dealt with social situations, and learn some things that regardless of what you may perceive yourself to be, introverted or extroverted, maybe there's something you can learn from this and help as you navigate life and relationships with others. This lesson will closely tie back to our previous lesson where we talked about being dependent on God. And so if you haven't heard that lesson, I would encourage you maybe to go back and listen to that at some point and look at how these things connect together. We've talked about different descriptions of Jesus' lifestyle. We're looking at different facets of his lifestyle. You know, our world is full of individuals that are titled, sometimes mostly self-titled, lifestyle influencers. They're people that are trying to influence how others live their life and what they do. And it's in everything from how they dress, what food they eat, where they go, how they interact with people, you name it. They're trying to influence others to have a lifestyle similar to theirs. I don't know what makes them think that their lifestyle is any more important or better than anyone else, but that's just what they've determined. So there's a lot of people that do that, but we can look to the ultimate source of a lifestyle in Jesus. And we can see the lifestyle that he lived, and we can use those things to better our service to God. We looked at Jesus being balanced. That was one of the first aspects. We looked at Jesus living a balanced life. He wasn't skewed one way or another in the things he was doing. He didn't give all his time to one particular thing. He learned and knew how to balance. He was prayerful. Anderson brought this lesson to us. He talked about being prayerful and talked about how Jesus used prayer to help him be balanced. That was a critical aspect of his life. He prayed often, and he prayed early, and he prayed about very important things, and that helped him to maintain that balance. Jesus was patient. He was very patient. We looked at how he interacted with other people in certain situations where a lot of times we can lose our patience. And you know in your life you have situations where you lose patience. But Jesus maintained that in his lifestyle. And last time we talked about Jesus being dependent. We talked about the need to be dependent on one another. Jesus was dependent on others. As the Son of God, he still depended on others that were close to him to help him do the things he needed to do. So why would it be any different for you and I? Well, part of the way that he did that came down to what today's lesson will be, in that he was social. He was social. He spent time with people. And I know that's a hard subject for some, because sometimes we feel like maybe we just don't want to be around people. Maybe we feel like being around people is draining to us. Being around people is hard and difficult. For others, it's what charges them up. It's what makes them go through life. It builds them up. But others, it's draining and challenging. So how do we balance that? How do we navigate that? Well, I think we can learn some things from Jesus that will help us in that. Now, as I did last time with the lesson on being dependent, I want to talk about a few things related to what we've kind of seen, and I narrowed down to the last 50 years. I want to set the stage for what the world around you is today, how people are thinking today, and maybe a little bit of why they're thinking that. And this would apply to us in this room today. There are aspects of this that will apply to you. There's been a number of studies done for a number of years, and they've looked at multiple generations. So going back to the baby boomer generation and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, and looking at various aspects of how they navigate social situations. And we can learn a lot from that and kind of start to understand the world that we are in right now. And I couple this with some of my own observations, things that I have observed in the world around, even things I've observed being here and being among you. We find that adolescents and young adults have experienced the sharpest drop in face-to-face interactions. It's one of the lessons that they've learned. They looked at young adults, looked at adolescents, and they see that the amount of time they spend face-to-face with others has sharply declined. In 2016, they found that college-bound students socialized about an hour less per day than their counterparts in the late 1980s. And what they found was that those in 2016, this was 10 years ago, those in 2016 at the time were doing less paid work, and the homework they were doing at the time was far more stable. Now I remember, because I would have been in high school in the late 1980s, and I remember I had a job, I was working, wasn't full-time, but I was working a lot of hours, and I remember going to school. And, one day you might go home and you might have a little bit of homework, and then the next day you'd go in there and every single teacher gave you hours of homework, and you're going home trying to figure out how I'm going to do all this homework, plus go to the job that I had and get that done as well. I remember it was, kind of a lot of up and down. And they're saying in 2016, students weren't dealing with that. They didn't have that much paid work, and the homework was kind of just leveled out. It wasn't as intense. And so even with that, where they should have had more time, they were socializing less. And so what they found is several things here. Social isolation, they see a significant increase in that. Significant increase as you start to look at generation after generation, people were isolating themselves more. Engagement with friends and neighbors, that plummeted. It plummeted. That's the word they use. It was sharpest among young adults. That engagement with people that maybe in years past we had been closer to, they said it just dropped off. Companionship, there was a progressive decline in that. Having someone that was close to you, that you spent time with and did things with. And then other, maybe even more concerning, is household family engagement. That decreased. So here you have people that are within a home that are showing less engagement with one another, even in living in the same household. In the same building, they're in there and they're engaging with one another less. Well, what are some key drivers of this? This was kind of interesting, and I thought, I should throw out the question, what do you think the key driver of this drop in spending time together might be? And what might you go to? And I'll let you think about that for just a second, but there's several things that happen, and there's kind of one event that I think a lot of people today might go to and say, well, that's the event that happened and it drove that, but the truth is it's not. The first one is digital media and time displacement. This was a big driver in this. So you talk about smartphones, and then you talk about just digital media in general, and what I mean by digital media, that's not just social media, which it would include that, but it's also other forms of digital media. So it could be like video games, it could be just watching television, all manner of things like that. So any of those type of things were starting to displace time that was spent with others. And not really something I want to get into today, but it's interesting if you dig into it, the smartphone, and you look at the timeline of the smartphone and you compare it to some of these studies, and you look at what happened when smartphones were released and what happened to people, and you see very distinct correlations in this data. And that could be a whole separate discussion, but we'll leave that for another time. So the hours spent on these things surged, they could see, but in-person time dropped, and sleep also dropped. That was another interesting. So when you have less sleep, you feel worse. You don't want to do things. You don't want to be with people, and then you spend more time on digital media and spend time in those things. It becomes a cycle. The shift from spontaneous in-person hangouts to screens. This is another one. I was thinking about when Kim and I were first married, we had other couples that we were They were about our age. They were married about the same time. And we just, I don't know, we just were always at somebody's house, it seemed like, especially Sundays. We would, after church, we would end up at somebody's house and we would eat together and hang out. And we just always enjoyed spending time together. And it was sometimes rather spontaneous. We didn't know whose house we would end up at. We just kind of whoever, had time to do that or host that, and there we were. But we see that there was a shift in that, and that in-person time started to decrease while shifting more to spending time looking at things on screens. I thought about all this together, and I kind of put this statement here that I think makes sense. The screen didn't cause the collapse of community, but it eagerly filled the void. So we can be quick to go blame these things and say, well, the smartphone came out, or Facebook, or video games, or whatever. We can be quick to blame that. Those things didn't really cause that. But when there was a void that started to happen, that void just sucked those things in, and they filled up that time. And that's part of the challenge that we see. Another one was the decay of social trust in institutions. And so what we see is that there was this erosion of social capital that started to happen. You think about capital, having, if you think of it in terms of money, having funds to spend on things. Social capital would be where you have that connection to other people and you have that built up. And so in those times when you have need, you've got someone to go to. And so there was this erosion where people had less of this social capital. They didn't have the connections that others may have had in the past, and that started to drop. Adults and adolescents today are less trusting of strangers. Less trusting of strangers. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and some of them, honestly, are probably good reasons because of some of the absolute nonsense that goes on in the world today, and people have become horrible in many ways. But there's been, over time, a lot less trust in strangers. I mean, I remember being a child and living on our little street in Piedmont, Oklahoma, in our little neighborhood, and I pretty much knew every person in every house on the street. Either they had children that were close to my age and we were outside playing together, or if they were older adults, we knew them. And we would go to their house. I've talked about him before, the old gentleman that lived next door. Of course, he went to church with us, but him and his wife, I would just bounce over there as a 5-year-old, pop over to his house, knock on the door, and go inside and hang out and hope that she made cookies. And, he had some interesting thing in his garage going on to show me. We had a lot more trust in people than we did. And that has started to drop off. And it's even seen now among younger adults that there's less trust in strangers. They have less confidence in shared institutions. So churches, civic clubs, their local neighborhoods, there's less confidence in those things. And that's where you see a lot of people turning away from churches and things. But as we've talked about before, there's also some scenarios starting to happen where younger adults are turning back to churches, especially young men that are looking for stability in life. They're looking for something to anchor them. And that really is kind of the heart of it, is people have less anchors in their life, whether it be church, whether it be some other group that they're a part of. People have started to have less of these things that anchor them socially and keep them tied and connected to people. The last one is economic and demographic pressures. So, more people live alone than any point in modern history, they found, by choice. They're just deciding, I just want to live alone. I don't want to have these connections. I've noticed a trend, oddly, I'll say on social media. So here I am saying I'm looking or seeing things on social media and have some time in that. But I've seen there's a trend where a lot of people will show their life that they're living alone. What I do at the end of my day when I come home alone to my apartment and my cat. If you're a cat person, I'm not making fun of cat people. I'm just saying that's the ones I've seen. They come home and they say, this is what I do at the end of my day, is I walk in and I make my dinner and it's made in the microwave, and then I get ready for the next day, and I might watch a little TV and do a few things. And people are watching this, and they're spending time on social media watching someone else live a life that's isolated and disconnected from other people. And as I started out saying, people like that are influencing others and saying, oh, well, this is a great thing. But I don't think it is. It's a challenge. There's more people living alone. There's declining birth rates, and those equal smaller families and an older average population. These things are also starting to drive that. Adult working hours limit socializing. That's also become a problem. You know, when you go back 50 years ago, most people got up, they picked up their briefcase, they put on their tie, they went to work. And when they got done at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, they picked up their briefcase and they went home. And they had the evening to participate in social time, whether that was with their family or with others. Well, now we're living in a world that people work from home, people have freedom, if you will, supposedly, to kind of flex and do work different ways, but then they're constantly tied to their work. And so that's limiting time that people are spending. Well, I want to talk briefly about this, and then we'll move on. It's the paradox of loneliness. You might look at this and say, well, if people are isolating themselves more, or people are spending less time with people, I should say, they're not socializing, then that automatically means that there is more isolation. So less time with people should equal more isolation, and that's not exactly correct. What was found was that while all age groups grew objectively more isolated, so across the board, there's more isolation, physically being isolated from one another. Older populations, was found, remained subjectively resilient. In other words, they would say, yes, I'm more isolated, but I don't feel more isolated. That's the two things there. While younger generations experienced an acute surge in both isolation and loneliness, younger generations are saying, yes, I'm more isolated, and yes, I feel it. I feel more lonely. And that, friends, is the world that we live in right now. And that's why understanding the lifestyle of Jesus and the social aspect is critically important. Because you may need to know it, but somebody around you may need to know it as well, and you can be an example to them in those things. In Titus chapter 2, verse 1, it starts out, but as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. And the verses that follow talk about the relationship of older and younger, things that are to be taught to the younger, both men and women. I think that's important for us to understand. We have older, experienced folks in this group today. We have younger people today, and we can learn from one another, and we can start to influence each other, but we have to be connected to one another. We have to depend on one another like we did last time, but we have to socialize, spend time talking and connected with one another. Well, let's think about how Jesus did this in his life. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, we read these words. The Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper comparable to him. As I've gone through and prepared for the study, this verse has stuck in my head over and over again. I've thought about this many times. In that chapter of Genesis, we're seeing the description of the creation of the world. God creating everything in the first couple of chapters. And everything that he creates, what did he say about it? It is good. Everything. It is good. And the description of creating man, he said it was very good. But what's the one thing that he said was not good? That man should be alone. He says that is not good. He looked at his own creation and he said, that is the missing part. People need to be connected to one another. And we know the rest of the story. He creates woman and starts creating those relationships that are there. It was vitally important. And keeping that in mind, I want you to think about that verse as we walk through the lifestyle of Jesus and think about the things that he is doing, because most certainly this would have been on his mind. Jesus was not a loner. When you look at his life, Jesus was not someone that just kind of floated around and stayed to himself and was just alone. We have plenty of folks in this world that operate like this, just kind of loners, out on the fringes, don't really connect anyone. Jesus was not that at all. We read earlier, he attended the wedding at Cana in John chapter 2. Spent time at this wedding with other people. And that may seem like, just a random event from his life. I mean, it's not really, because we see the kind of the initial start of him kind of presenting who he is to people in that situation. But he did it in a social situation. He didn't kind of just on the side, pull somebody aside and say, hey, I'm the Messiah. No, he was in a group of people. He was spending time with others. He visited in many homes. We see Jesus going to people's homes. And this was something that especially the religious leaders of the day really tried to call him out on, because he's going to, like the home of Simon the Pharisee, he's going to a tax collector's home, Zacchaeus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. We know that relationship he had with them. Probably, there's a lot of things that he spent time there, and we see that, but when we look at what is written about the time he spent with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, you get the understanding that he was very, very closely tied to them. That's where he spent a lot of time and spent that close to them. He depended on them greatly. He was not a loner. He constantly surrounded himself with multitudes and did not withdraw except to rest and pray. Kim and I were talking about this at dinner last night. Kim kind of had the idea that, well, maybe Jesus was an introvert himself. Maybe he was an introvert, because he had to withdraw himself to kind of recharge and rest and kind of get away from the multitudes. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't even know if those things are real things or we just made up those labels, but Jesus spent a lot of time with multitudes, with a lot of people, healing them, speaking to them, spending time with them. And at certain times, part of that balance was to withdraw and rest and pray. And that's how he prepared himself. And it's an important lesson for us to learn, understanding that we can recharge ourselves. We can find ways to do that if we look at his lifestyle and the way that he handled those things. We find that Jesus wanted to mold others into greatness. That was really kind of at the heart of what he was trying to do, mold them into something great, something better. He was looking for those to engage in conversation and opportunities that he could preach to them. I ran my own little experiment this week. I was, earlier in the week, I had to go do some lab work. And I go into it was a DLO lab where I had to go, I was sent to. And I was walking into this place for my appointment. And as I'm walking up to the door, this gentleman is coming to the same door. And he was a little bit older than me, I think. Probably not too much, but he was having a little difficulty walking and such. And he made his way to the door, and I let him in. And perhaps it's because I had this lesson on my mind. As he's walking in the door, I just engaged him in conversation. How are you today? And he answered me. We got checked in for our appointments, and we sat down. It was just he and I in the waiting room. And you could tell he was just planning on sitting there and kind of just looking at his feet and, keeping quiet. And in the spirit of, having fun, like I like to do sometimes with folks, I look at him and said, well, you got big plans today? And he kind of looks up at me a little startled, and he says, well, I think I'll do a little yard work today. And, okay. And then of course, I just keep asking him questions about that. What's he planning to do and all that. We had a good discussion for a while. A little bit of time just spent engaging someone. I could have sat there scrolling my phone, just looking at whatever, or staring at the wall, but engaging in a little bit of conversation. Jesus did that. Jesus would talk to people and engage them. He was looking for opportunities to engage people in conversation. And I know and I realize that is not easy for everyone in this room to do. There are some of you that is terrifying to do that. But maybe there's opportunities that you have where you can engage folks. Mark 1 and verse 16, as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And in Mark 2 and verse 14, as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So he arose and followed him. Some of the early interactions that Jesus had with people were just kind of in everyday activities. He's walking along the sea, just walking out there, and he observes these fishermen. And he says, "Follow me." He ultimately called them to follow him. And Levi, later called Matthew, is sitting just in the tax office, and he says, "Follow me." He recognized who these people were, and he called them. And so those small situations are important, and we can think about that. He looked for opportunities to mold people into greatness, and that's something you and I can think about as well. How does the world define greatness? If you think about what greatness is in the eyes of the world, what does that look like? Greatness in the eyes of the world typically will tie back to perhaps money, power, the ability to maybe speak eloquently. Maybe it's greatness in the form of sports or acting or music, some talent. People look at greatness and define it that way. But that's not how God defines greatness. God doesn't define greatness by those things, the things that man does. Matthew 18 verse 4, he defines it as being as a little child. Whoever humbles himself as a little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He was trying to mold people into greatness and helping them to understand that greatness was humility. It was not what everybody around them was saying greatness was. And it was being a servant. In Mark 9 and verse 35, he sat down, he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all." Does the world define greatness by service? I don't think so. But Jesus did. His lifestyle says, be humble, be a servant. That was greatness. And he was trying to mold people into that greatness. You see, Jesus recognized potential greatness in others. He could look at other people and he could see greatness where others might not have picked up on that. And part of that was because he spent time with people and he got to know them. Simon was renamed Peter, which means the rock. You remember the lesson last week David gave about was Peter qualified to be an elder? And all the things we learned about Peter, that was a recognition of greatness on the part of Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "There's greatness in there," even though he had a lot of challenges. James and John were going to have to lose their hot tempers, called them sons of thunder because they had a temper. But they learned to overcome that, and he learned to harness that into greatness. Levi, the tax collector, was to become Matthew, which means gift of God. Here's this guy that essentially sold out to the Romans. He's a Jew, and he sells out to them so he could sit and be the tax collector and make a good portion of money. But Jesus walks by and says, "Follow me," to him because he recognized that there was greatness there. And think about what Matthew ended up doing. Matthew, in a sense, sold out to the Romans so he could collect the tax money, but later is being called a gift of God. His name means gift of God, giving something back to others. Who's the one gospel writer that recorded the Sermon on the Mount in its entirety? It was Matthew. What a great gift to have that recorded and to share that with the world. Jesus recognized greatness in people. There was Nathanael, who was to become one in whom there was no guile. Everybody that he talked to, everybody he met, he was looking for that potential greatness. So I ask you this question: how can we recognize the potential in others today if we are not with them? How can you recognize that? If you don't spend time with someone, how are you going to know that they have potential greatness? And furthermore, how are you going to mold them into greatness if you're not with them? We simply can't. That's the truth of the matter. Jesus understood that spending time with people was a very important part of his lifestyle. And by doing that, he was able to mold them into that potential greatness. Jesus was a people watcher. I've talked about this one before, and I mentioned it, I think, in our kind of initial overview of this study. Jesus was a people watcher. This is my favorite one, because I'm a people watcher. I love this. I've said it before. You know, he was always alert, and he was watching for things that other people missed. It is very easy to float through life and just kind of be blissfully unaware of other people's happenings in their life. Pretty easy. You can just kind of go through life and sort of keep your head up to a certain level and not really look at what's going on at ground level. You just kind of, you know, people are there, but you don't really dive deep into their life. Jesus would watch people, and as he did, he could pick up on some of the smallest things that others didn't even see. Are you a people watcher? Do you pick up on things that are going on around you? Do you really look at people? And I don't mean people watcher in some creepy, weird way, you know, where you're just, you know, kind of prying into their life, but being observant of the things that are going on around you. Jesus was always alert and watching for things. In Mark chapter 12, verse 41, Jesus sat opposite the treasury, and he saw how the people put money into the treasury. Here's this situation. He's sitting out with his disciples and just watching the crowds pass by. And people are putting money in the treasury, and he observes this widow, and he observes the small amount that she places in there. And he observes others in the way they kind of reach into their pockets and they pull out the big wad of cash and, you know, make a show of it and whatever they're doing. And here's this humble person that had very little and places that in there. Jesus saw that, where others are sitting around and probably just didn't even think about it, weren't observing that. Jesus says, there's something different here. There's a lesson in this. Look at what she's doing. Learn something from her. In John chapter 5, verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, and he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" This is one of my favorite encounters that Jesus has. If you back up and kind of get the rest of the story here, he's come into, there's a pool by the sheep gate, sheep pool, I think that it's called, but basically he's there, and this is the story where the water would stir up, and everybody that's around there thought if they jumped in the water when the water's stirring up, it's an angel and we'll be healed from whatever infirmities we have. And Jesus happens upon this scene, and there's the commotion there that's going on. And he looks out in this crowd and he sees this one individual who had been there for a long time, who had really no one there to help him into the water. He just was there hoping that something would happen to get him down into that water. And out of all the crowd, Jesus picks him out. I kind of picture the scene here, and David will know what I'm talking about, but it always reminds me, the picture in my head, I think about when I got off the airplane in Hyderabad, India, and I'm at the baggage carousel, and there's like 9 billion Indians there at the baggage carousel. And when that thing started moving, it was just like the biggest madhouse I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, people piling over on top of each other and bags flying and all that. And I was left to jump into the middle of this to try to rescue our things. That's the image I get of this guy. He's there, and there's this great crowd, and he needs to get to this point, and there's nobody there to help him. And the commotion happens, and Jesus, looking across all of these people in the commotion, zeroes in on him. Can you do that? Can you watch people that way, and can you look through all the commotion that goes on around them, even all the commotion in their own life, and can you see and pinpoint a need that they have? Jesus was a people watcher, and that was very important. That was an important part of his social life or his connection to people. Well, let's think about, as we wrap this up, how can we improve the way we interact with others? Just give you a few things here to think about. I want you to think about evangelism for a minute. Being able to spread the gospel to others. You know, evangelism is not what you do, it is who you are. And let me explain that a little bit. Mark 16, 15, and 16, Jesus tells them, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And we tend to read that and we think, okay, well, evangelism is something I do. It's an event. It's something I get my evangelism overalls on, and I get my tools, and I head out the door and I go do this thing. And then when I'm done, I come home and I clean up and I go back to life. And that's the wrong way of thinking about this. It's not an event. It should be our lifestyle. It should be part of who we are every single day. That's how Jesus operated. And when you think about it in those terms, and you think in your life that it's part of who I am, then you start to look at every individual that you come across and say, this could be an opportunity. This could be somebody that I need to influence for better. When you're people watching and you see a challenging situation, you know, maybe I need to say something or do something or be part of this. We start to look at our social situations much different, and we start to see a greater importance in those things. Romans 12, verse 1 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. The whole idea that you're building yourself to be something much greater. Present your bodies a living sacrifice. How are you presenting yourself into the world to others? Are you presenting yourself as a sacrifice, sacrificially dealing with others? That's something for us to think about. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, and then skipping to verse 10, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us, always carrying about in the body of the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. The life of Jesus may be manifested in our body. Evangelism is not an event. It is who you are. It becomes who you are. And you are manifesting that life of Jesus to others when you make yourself that very thing and you become that living sacrifice. We can be mindful of our own biases. Be mindful of our own biases. You know, when Jesus sat at the well in John chapter 4, and he encountered a Samaritan woman, you remember that Samaritan woman was surprised whenever he talked to her? You're asking me, a Samaritan woman, to get you a drink? You're a Jew and you're talking to me? You see, she had a thought out bias toward Jesus because he was a Jew, and she maybe more so was assuming that he had a bias toward her because she was a Samaritan. Well, he didn't. He just looked at her as another person, a person that had a need. And so we see in James chapter 2, verse 1, "My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality." Don't be partial to people. Don't look at someone and say, I don't think they're going to respond to me, or they just don't fit the mold with what I see as being someone that would respond. And so I'm just going to, kind of just step away from that. That small talk we have may produce big results, is the lesson here. And I kind of got ahead of myself just a moment ago, but that small talk that we have may produce those big results. Again, John chapter 4:7, when he sits there and talks to that woman at the well, he says, "Give me a drink." It's a simple thing. I sat with that gentleman in the office the other day, or the lab, and had a small conversation. Just small talk. It wasn't anything big. I didn't know where that was going to go. I didn't know what that was going to mean. Jesus says, "Give me a drink." I saw a story, I'll tell this quickly. The other day is actually from where Anderson works. His boss was talking about going into a home. They'd gotten a call, and if you don't know, Anderson works for a company that does water treatment. And so if you have bad water, they can make good water. His boss got a call. There was a lady, she was in her early 90s, I believe, and she needed some salt for her water softener system. He was close, so he got a call, and he had that with him, so he took it over to her house. And he walked in there, and the story he relayed was that he went in and just kind of making small talk, "How are you today?" And she looked at him and said, "I'm just not doing very well." And he started talking to her about it and found out that she'd been sick for a while, like been ill. Hadn't been feeling good. Doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. She's not feeling good. And he said, "Have you had your well tested?" And she's like, "No." And he says, let me take a sample and we'll test your well. So he does that. Found out that her water had E. coli in it. She's been drinking this water for who knows how long. They tested her well. It had a crack in the well that was causing this to get in there. And they were able to get it fixed for her. It kind of made me think of Jesus at the well. That small question that led to a big solution, produced big results, that healed someone, that took care of a problem in their life. John 4, verse 39, later in this chapter, many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him. A simple question, "Give me a drink," or a statement rather, "Give me a drink," turned into this. You never know what your time spent talking with someone and very small talk can do. It may produce something very big. Keep that in mind. These are ways we can improve our interactions with others. Think about evangelism. Think about what that means and who it is, who you are in that regard. Be mindful of your biases, and don't underestimate the power of small talk and where that might lead. The lifestyle of Jesus, being social, is very important. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's a topic that is difficult for some. It's hard for certain folks to maybe be as social as others, and I get that. But maybe you can learn something today that will help you in that regard. And maybe there's a smaller situation that you are more comfortable in that you can start to become an influence on others. The lifestyle of Jesus teaches us a lot of great lessons. I think we're going to have one more final lesson on this next time I speak. We'll talk about Jesus being authoritative and what that means to us. And then we'll wrap the series up with that. Today, if there is someone here that is not a child of God, has never obeyed the gospel, has never entered the waters of baptism, I want to ask you today, why not? What has stopped you from doing that? Is it a lack of understanding? We can study with you. We can help you to learn more about that. Do you know that you need to do that, but you just haven't made that commitment? What's stopping you from doing that? If there's something that's holding you back that we can help with, we would like to know that and help you with those things. If there's someone here today that is already serving God but maybe struggling with whatever situation in life, let us sit down with you and talk about those things and pray with you and encourage you. Be dependent upon us here. Let us help you with those things. If there is any need that you have today that we can help with, please let us know while we together stand and sing.